It's Annette here, and today I'm chatting with Melanie Saward about her new book, Deep Faith, Resilient Faith. Now, I just read a really interesting statistic that 75% of kids have left the church between the ages of 18 to 29. So, resilience is certainly a buzzword at the moment, but what does it have to do with faith? How is it related to faith and staying it out?
Well, I think we have misunderstood, or maybe not really uh, fully conceived like what it means when we go through hardship. Like the Bible is very clear that we will all go through hardship. We will all go through tough things. We will all be offended at times. It's actually not a secret. That's not a secret in scripture. But the thing that seems to be missing, when I was a kid and I was like occasionally going to youth group and things like that, you'd hear people say things like, when you go through something tough, like, what did you learn from that circumstance? And what did that show you about God? But for some reason, we don't seem to ask ourselves these questions as much now. We go through these different circumstances that are really tough. And the whole point of these like circumstances is that it's meant to help us go deeper in our relationship with God, and it's meant to help us have a stronger faith where we believe God more, but also we love God more because we see how He carries us through these different circumstances. And I think that's the difference between where there is a resilience level in our faith versus normal resilience. Like normal resilience is actually written about a lot, and I am by no means an expert on that topic. But the idea that we bounce back and we're able to like go through hard things, but bounce back quickly and continue with life. Now, when it comes to our faith, it's the same kind of thing. It's not just that we're bouncing back, but we're bouncing back with a greater, more resolute faith, with a deeper faith, with a greater love for God that is equipping us to continue through different hardships that will surely come.
Mm. Now, in your book, you talk a bit about shallow faith, and that can be a really difficult, tricky idea to navigate or accept. And so, what do you mean when you talk about shallow faith?
Well, I firstly don't deny that the word shallow is considered to be a very offensive statement to make about someone. My intention in doing that was more related to this analogy that I was working on in the book. And so you read about this analogy of trees and the fact that trees have these root systems, and we have this belief that the root system will be 2 times the size of what the tree is expected to be, but it doesn't actually work that simply or simplistically with trees. Like it's this kind of not a myth, but it's just not consistent across all trees. And so I had been thinking about this idea that the depth of our root system, which is also mentioned in scripture many times too, this idea that we allow our roots to grow deep in love, in the love of Christ. Well, this idea like is really what is like, I suppose I was explaining what faith is supposed to be like. The effort that roots have to take to get deeper into soil is not an accident. It has to push through. It has to grow. And so this is the idea that I was working on. So when I talk about shallow faith, I'm not talking about being a shallow person. I'm talking about the extent to which our faith is deep and the way that it is able to be stable and strong in the face of the different elements that, like a tree would have. The difference between a tree that makes it and one that doesn't is likely to be its root system and how able it is to stand against the forces. So that's what I meant by it.
Now, I love that in your book, you're not just preaching, you're actually talking from personal experience. Do you want to share with us how you came to recognize the shallowness of your faith?
Yeah, sure. Not with a lot of fun, that's for sure. But like when you persist through something, you get the treasure at the end of the goal, isn't it? So, for myself, I guess I had gone through a really tough season where I had assumed my life was going to work out a certain way, as we do, and it ended up on a very, very different trajectory without me really knowing how I would get out of it. And so I grappled with a lot of like different thoughts in that time. I was trying to work out what the point of all of this was and what was all that stuff I did for. And, but I thankfully had the time to actually really get into scripture. I always read scripture every day, but this time, you didn't have the limitations of of work and whatnot to really get into it. And I kept reading these stories of the early Christian church, which is not perfect either, but the kind of things that they were grappling with. And I realized that my frustrations really came from preference. Now, not to dismiss that things that don't work out as you think they were going to isn't a real disappointment and a real discouragement. And I didn't certainly dismiss the feelings I had. But I realized that there was a very big difference, like a very big gap between the challenges that I was dealing with and the challenges that the early church were dealing with, and also the kind of depth they had, and also Paul and the people who wrote a lot of those letters, the depth that they had in their faith to be able to carry on. And I kind of, worked out that, hey, there's something not right here. There's a gap. And maybe my faith, maybe I am not understanding some things in scripture that are really critical to faith, that they understood and they grasped with. And so that's, it was probably a journey of about 3 years for me to unpack a lot of that. But yeah, that's kind of how I came to realize that, hey, my faith is actually can be quite fickle at times, and I don't think that's how it was meant to be.
For sure. And now you mentioned throughout your book and on your podcast as well, this concept that something is missing. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so this is a statement that was definitely coming up for me during my time of grappling and all that kind of stuff. And what I've realized over the years is that it's actually a statement that a lot of Christians, when they're in private circles and are able to express themselves freely, they also share this same sentiment that something is missing, that what I thought faith would be has not seemed to be exactly what I thought it would be. There is something missing. And so the whole idea of this statement is that we are only judging our experience of faith based on what we know at the time, right? So again, if we're talking about depth and we go deeper in our faith and we kind of understand these deeper, more resilient kind of issues, then we can see like what this faith is really about. And some of that is what I talk about in the book, is that me going, wow, this is actually faith, right? And so this idea of something is missing is this sentiment that a lot of people express because they want more meaning in their faith. They've thought that this would mean more than it was, and they want to experience that on a daily basis. And so that's what I'm really challenging people to do. And it is not an easy thing. It requires us to be focused and requires us to be desperate and hungry for more. But there is definitely meaning at the end of it. And so I think there would be less people walking away from faith if we were to see the deep, deep meaning, the deep soul searching kind of stuff that scripture and God was always meant to answer.
And now, so for somebody that's watching us today and they're thinking, maybe that's me, maybe my faith is not as deep as I thought, maybe it is a little bit shallow. What would be your advice? What is the secret to moving to that deep and nourishing faith that we all want to have?
Well, the truth is I've probably dedicated about 9 chapters to that exploration. So if you really want to get into it, that's where you got to go. I think the biggest thing is recognizing our attachment to this life and the fact that we are actually so attached to this life. And one of the things that we see in Revelations, that very famous verse that gets quoted, that they overcame by the word of their testimony. It also says, and because they did not love their lives so much. So it's kind of this weird idea, but the fact is that we are both meant to be grateful and joyful for the lives that we are given, but we also aren't meant to be so attached to it that it's almost like we would rather be here on earth than we would rather be in heaven with Jesus. Now that's a tough idea to grapple with, and I can say myself that I did not find that an easy one to understand when I first sort of started facing that one. But the truth is that we must recognize that hardship actually has a place in our faith journey, and that's combined with us recognizing that the attachment to this life actually limits us and inhibits us from experiencing the fullness of Christ and the fullness of faith that, again, we were always meant to have, the deep, nourishing stuff that Paul often talks about, where he can do without food or with food. He is that content. That's what I think is, at the crux of this deep, nourishing faith life that we have on offer to us.
Awesome. Now, Deep Faith, Resilient Faith is out now at good bookstores. And where can people go to listen to your podcast?
Well, it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's on, pretty much any good podcast provider. And of course, you can go and listen to it on my website too, and YouTube. So it's plenty of places if you want to listen.
Can't miss it.
Yes, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today. It's been great chatting to you, and I hope that everybody that's listening has found something through this that can deepen their faith and bring a resilience to their faith that wasn't there before.
Thank you.